wars across the land. And don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters all beyond your command. Yeah, yeah. And your road is rapidly aging. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand. For the times, they are a-changing. The line is drawn, the curse is cast, and the slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past, and the order is rapidly changing. For the times, they are a-changing. Thank you. Let's switch guitars real quick.
Oh, I can't see anybody. Chris, how is your summer going?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Getting ready to move to Canada in about 3 weeks. Yeah, for 4 months. For 4 months, not for good. And we're building a house too.
You're building a house here?
Yeah.
So you're moving for 4 months. The house is going to be built?
Yeah, the house is.
Where are you building?
Saybrook.
Okay.
Where Saybrook is?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, we moved out of College Heights and we went to a little bit bigger house.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah, it should be.
Design, everything.
Yeah, it was a long process.
As soon as you're open seat tuning, so I can switch guitars.
I don't know.
Like right now, I have an hour right
now. Swift and true, straight to my heart. Love has come calling, and I'm back there again. I pour myself a brand new start, glad to be falling for the beauty of things. I'm on the outside looking in, over and over and over again. There's no telling where I've been, how I return there, how much I have seen. your soldier of love. I am your soldier of love. Glad to be fallen for the beauty within. The beauty within, the beauty within. Thanks. We got a few more for you before we kick off the second session. I seem to recognize your face, haunting, familiar. I can't seem to place it. Cannot find a candle of dawn to light your name. Lifetimes are catching up with me. All these changes take place. I wish I'd seen the place, but no one's ever taken me. Hearts and thoughts fade away. Hearts and thoughts fade away. I swear I recognize your breath. Memories like fingerprints all slowly erased. Neil wouldn't recall, for I'm not my mother. It's hard when you're stuck upon the shelf. I've changed by not changing at all. A small town predicts my fate. Perhaps that's what no one wants to see. I just wanna scream hello. Hearts and thoughts say fade, fade away. Hearts and thoughts say fade away. Hearts and thoughts say fade, fade away, fade. Thank you very much. Can I do one more? Do one more? Cool. It's, cool. Thank you again for letting me play for all of you. And enjoy the next day and a half of summer camp. Thank you. The song's called May. I once believed in an angel until our love, the flicks and tricks she played, yeah, which I thought surrounded her while I was gone, but I'm wrong. Wait, for us to again soon be here, cheek to cheek as one united, she and he. No, now. But soon the days roll by, and it seems the tears are set aside, yeah, with confidence and belief in me. It should all be you and me, girl. No, now. She's too like me, yeah. Falls around the corner. It would have been that time. Your finger, ring finger, she was mine, all mine. She played the role of Cinderella. Too bad she was fake, a fake smile, a fake soul, a real heartache. But soon the days roll by, and it seems the tears are set aside, yeah, with confidence and belief in me. It should all be you and me, girl. No, now. She's too unlike me, yeah. Thank you.
I would vote for that too. Hi there, Stuart. My drink. Shoot.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Learning Design Summer Camp, the afternoon sessions. Another round of applause for Dean Blackstock. If you didn't catch him this morning, the thing I love about live music, especially this performance here, is that everybody, like I look out on the crowd here, and everybody has like a little smile on their face, and people are talking and laughing and stuff. It just, yeah, they're chillaxing. There you go. So thanks again, Dean, for doing that for us. I just want to start off talking a little bit about the Faculty Fellows program, and then we'll just jump into their discussion. And the Faculty Fellows have really been thinking about their topics for, say, a month and a half now. And so I expect the discussion to be really good, both between them and between them and the audience. So. The Tld Faculty Fellows program, TLT has always worked with faculty, but in a lot of cases in the past, it's been we'll develop a multimedia tool, we'll develop a course material, we'll be like Cole was saying, we'll ask for your 10 pages of content, then we'll turn that into an online course. And we rarely get to work with faculty on topics related to their research interests. Because we're in the job of teaching and learning, putting courses online, right? So in 2008, Carla Zembel-Saul spent the summer with us, and Carla, please correct me if I get any of this wrong. She was a first of a new type of faculty fellow. Pierre Santos was with us before, but again, that was working on specific course-based tools. But she spent the summer with us on the topic blogs as portfolio. And her thinking around that topic really shaped what we ended up doing with the movable type platform, thinking of it not just as a blogging platform, but for portfolios and that sort of thing. And in fact, Cole just went out and talked to movable type again and told them about what we had in mind, what our vision is for using their tool. And they were telling us about some of the new advancements that's going to be in the next version. So. This year we have 4 faculty fellows. Carla has come back to work with us again for another summer. And we also have Stuart Selber, Chris Long, and Elisa Cahoy. The URL down at the bottom links to all of their descriptions of their projects and to some of the blog posts and stuff that they've been making, to wiki pages and that sort of thing that are related to their projects. So with that, I will turn it over to the Faculty Fellows and ask each of you, starting maybe with Stuart here, to just describe kind of your research interests, what you've been doing so far, and where you want to take it by the end of the summer.
Sure, thanks. Stuart Salber, I'm a faculty member in the English department, and I also have appointments in the Science, Technology, and Society program and in IST. And Cole asked me if I wanted to be a faculty fellow, and that would involve an air-conditioned cubicle with a large screen monitor. So I don't know if you've ever been in the Burroughs building. That's a great upgrade. So I said, I'll do it. and you can tell me what the requirements are later. And Cole said, well, just pick something that you're interested in and you want to work on. So how hard was that? So I proposed something that was already underway. I direct the writing program, the composition program at Penn State. We see 10,000 students a year in the first year course, and then we see all of those students again in the upper division writing requirement, one of the English 202s. So we have 2 gen ed requirements. Cole said we need so-called high impact projects. I said we touch every Penn State student 2 times. And he said that counts as a high impact project. Yeah, counts twice. I originally came to Cole because I wanted to run all of our writing classes in basically S-Tech rooms. And some universities do that. We're sort of here in the 21st century. And in many ways, the writing program lags, probably in large part because of our scale issues. We run 130, say, 5 sections of first year composition a semester, 24 students per course. So you can do the math to see how many S-Tech rooms we would actually need. Not a very realistic request. But in this day and age, we don't have to have everything sort of tied, geophysically. So we've been working on some virtual platforms and some hybrid configurations. And we were starting relatively small with our upper division English 202 classes, and in particular with the technical writing class, which every engineering student and science student on campus has to take. And we picked one assignment, one sort of prototypical assignment out of that course, the instruction set, which maps very nicely onto what instructional designers do here in ITS. So my project has been attempting to conceptualize what how-to discourse looks like, more specifically the instruction set, when it moves online. We know a lot about what print-based instruction sets look like, what they do. There's sort of a rich research base for understanding that. Of course, the instruction set has moved online. It's fractured. It's reconfigured. It looks different, both in terms of design, but also in terms of who is contributing. There's no longer this sort of expert-to-user function that we've understood in the offline world. It's much more organic and bottom-up. But we don't really have a good understanding of that practice, even though it's widespread. So in my project, I've been trying to conceptualize what instruction sets look like when they move online, and I've developed some models for those. And then by the end of my time, what I'd like to do is develop some pedagogical materials out of that can be used in the technical writing class, but also that could be used by instructional designers in ITS. For example, has ITS taken a hard look at its how-to discourse to try to understand what it looks like as it moves online? Are we simply bringing along the conventions and practices that were developed in sort of an offline world, or are we rethinking those practices? So that's what my project's working on.
Thanks, Stuart. My name is Elisa Cahoy, and I am Assistant Head of Library Learning Services in the University Libraries here at University Park. And when Stuart said that what he's doing is part of his project is sort of reimagining and reinventing a practice as it moves from print to online, that struck a chord with me because I think my project here in ETS this summer is somewhat similar. I'm a former children's librarian and a former middle school librarian, and then 9 years ago I came here to Penn State and was lucky enough to get a job here as what we call an academic librarian. And librarians here at Penn State are kind of a little bit outside the norm. Not every librarian at every school has faculty status and goes through the promotion and tenure process. I swear I'm going to get somewhere with this. And I'm not going to just tell you my life story. I know John Mayer's already motioning me to move it along. Anyway, And so I have a very vivid memory of sitting down to actually think about what was my research agenda. Because when you're a children's librarian, you just get to read children's books all day. You don't have to have a research agenda. And so what was I actually going to study here and use to prove that I could actually stick around past 6 years? And I thought about how I had existed in the world of kids and the world of K to 12 up until I came here. And I thought, well, how can I connect K to 12 and college and think of it as a continuum? And so the first article that I wrote was actually about, we have information literacy standards in academic libraries that are about what are the standards that college students should achieve in order to be information literate. And there are K to 12 standards too. And so my first article was about connecting K to 12 and college information literacy standards. And little did I know when I wrote that first article, I'm not really a rule-bound person, and standards are kind of like rules, but I really like writing about that. And so I've continued on with that. And what I'm working on this summer, I finally got to it, is re-envisioning how information literacy standards and information literacy in general has changed. Like Stuart said, kind of moving from print to online. If you think about what our students have created in the past, well, they've been writing research papers. As a librarian, that's been, here at Penn State, that's been the body of my work, is helping students find sources for their research papers. And now we find, as librarians, that we're moving into a different form of assignments with students. And so I'm working with the Digital Commons this summer on how does information literacy integrate into the online content creation process. When students are creating videos or podcasts, how are they finding sources and how are they finding the best sources for their projects? And what's the librarian's role in that? And what I hope will also come out of this is a new article on the future of higher ed information literacy standards. K to 12 has done a much better job of kind of thinking ahead and thinking about what are the skills our students need to be information literate, successful people in the future. And higher ed has kind of lagged behind a little bit. And so I think my work here in ETS is hopefully going to reach a broader audience in the future. And I get to work with, I'm going to mention my team. I get to work with 3 great people. I get to work with Chris Millay, Kim Wink, and Hannah Insko. And I didn't even get to talk about any of the projects we've done. But hopefully I will. We have a lot of time.
My name is Christopher Long, and hearing about all this high-impact stuff, I'm wondering about what kind of high impact my project is. I wasn't told that we had to have high impact, but yeah, right. That's good. Good. My project is entitled Socratic Politics and Digital Dialogue. I teach philosophy here at Penn State, and I I focus on ancient Greek philosophy. A large part of my work has been on Aristotle, but I'm now turning my attention to Plato and in particular to the figure of Socrates, who, from my perspective, embodies a certain kind of political engagement that I think can be performed in an interesting way using social web and Web 2.0 technology. So my project really, I think, is to use these technologies to perform a certain kind of scholarship. I intentionally didn't want to do a project that thought about the implications of all of these technologies on pedagogy and in a theoretical way, but I wanted to just use the technologies to perform some academic scholarship, but also to allow my scholarship perhaps to reach out to a broader community. You know, philosophers have had a tendency to seem isolated and disengaged. So I think there's a way in which some of these technologies allow us to talk to people we might not otherwise be able to talk to. It forces us to put our thoughts into a language that maybe more people can identify with than we might otherwise be doing when we're just writing to journals and to books. So I see this as a way of, this project as a way of reaching out beyond the limited sphere of my academic scholarly colleagues, although I also want to engage them. So I'm ending up doing a number of things on some different levels. One of the main things that we've done, my team has been great, Matt Meyer and Alan Gorky and Ryan Wetzel. We've been producing some podcasts called the Digital Dialogue Podcast, which you can check out on iTunes U, and also if you go to the Socratic Politics in Digital Dialogue blog that I have running. And one of the things, this was really Alan's, at Alan's encouragement, you know, to emphasize the importance of podcasting. The thing that I wanted to do was to have a kind of medium that allowed me to think about some things without it having to be quite so set in writing, maybe is the best way to put it. This is actually a pretty interesting and important theme in the Platonic dialogues, when the technological advance that Plato was dealing with was the move from the oral tradition to a writing tradition, and he was dealing with questions of what happens what do you gain and what do you lose when writing becomes the mode of communication as opposed to remembering and reciting things orally. So he was, Plato and also Socrates, who himself chose not to write, but to simply engage people in philosophical conversations. Happily, Plato did write, so we do have a record of them. But he wrote dialogues, and those dialogues are dynamic. And as a philosophical form, the dialogue is a pretty important and interesting form. It allows you to bring in ambiguity and dramatic character and all sorts of things that force the readers and those of us who are engaged in it to think critically about what we're engaged with. So I was hoping that coming out of some political involvement with the Obama campaign last year and seeing the power that the web had in that regard, I was hoping to try to use some of that, some of these technologies to expand my scholarship, but also the political agenda really is to get people to start thinking about questions that are important to us all, questions of the meaning of justice, what does it mean to live a good life, and how do we make our lives fulfilling and meaningful. So I really see this as a chance to play with some of these technologies, and there's a number of things that hopefully we'll talk about on the panel with regard to blogging and other things that I think are really exciting about the way technology empowers us to do this. But just to be clear, what I see happening here with these technologies is just an extension of what's always happened in human culture and human nature, just another way for us to communicate with one another and to reflect critically and deliberatively and thoughtfully about the human experience.
I'm Carla Zembelslaw. I'm a faculty member in science education, which is in the teacher education program in the College of Education here at Penn State. I work primarily with elementary educators, and we have been doing electronic portfolios in that space since I came here, and I was actually working on electronic portfolios prior to that. Let me try something. My first electronic portfolios, we were using HyperCard stacks. Oh, last year that got a cheer. I know. I'm in a room full of I was going to see if it actually worked twice. But so anyhow, we spent a lot of time thinking about this, and our idea has always been one around engaging our students in the ongoing consideration and thinking about their own development as a professional in this space. So that's been the ultimate learning goal for us, not assessment, not competencies, although some of what you'll see today addresses those issues, because a tension we were facing is that as people saw what students were doing in the electronic portfolio space, oh hey, I see Leanne Hafner is here. Leanne is a faculty member at Penn State Altoona, and she actually was instrumental in the first web-based portfolios. If she hadn't stood next to me and said, we're going to go from just electronic portfolios to try this whole web-based thing. I don't know if we'd have done it as quickly as we did, so I'm glad to see her in the crowd. But anyhow, so we've had this ongoing tension between supporting student learning, which those of us in the program and the faculty really want to do, and with being accountable to our accrediting agencies. And so that's one of the things that brought me to the faculty fellow work last summer, was really trying to figure out this tension. How do I continue to support student learning, but give these folks what they need to see that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of professional development. And so I figured it would probably be easier to drive you through a portfolio space so that you can see what we did last summer and then why I'm back and still struggling with these issues. My team last summer included Chris Stubbs, Brad Kozlik, TK, Aaron Long was part of the team as well. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what do portfolios really mean, what does it mean to be evidence-based in your conversations about what is reflection, really, what is the nature of reflection, all pretty important. And so we ran a pilot this year in the elementary professional development school. There are 60 students in that space. This is one of their portfolios. 40 participated in the pilot. So everyone was introduced to blogs as portfolio. And 40 students continued to pursue blogs as portfolio for the rest of the year, which is actually, for a pilot, a voluntary pilot, is the most impressive sort of response that I've ever received in something like this. So out of the box, Movable Type had some features last summer that were introduced that we really liked, and one was the professional website look and feel, so that students, you can enter the portfolio, you have an introduction to into the portfolio, and then a space to reflect on your thinking and development over time. So when you come to an intern portfolio, this is what you'll see, a little bit about themselves. But when we get into the blog space, what we see is that students are engaged in this program. These are future elementary teachers in their senior year. And so what they're really doing is blogging about the kinds of experiences that they're having in schools with kids. They're blogging about their coursework. They're blogging about things that they're reading. But the one step that we've asked them to do is to think about that in relation to your development as a teacher. And so what you'll see in the tag cloud is that there are some artificial tags that relate to our performance framework in the program. So as you do this reflection on your fraction lesson, how does that reflect something about your development as a professional educator? What did you learn? What moves you closer to the center of this community? And that's what we're asking them to write about in tag. And like any other tagging, if you clicked on A1, you go to a list of all the blog entries that were tagged in that way. And that's really lovely. And it certainly helps a student go through and look at that. But what we really wanted was, at the point in time where you're really thinking about how am I developing as a professional in this space, what could you look at that might help you see a meta view of the things that you've been tagging in that way over time. And so this is part of the template that was built by the team last year around the domains, so that now what I see as a student when I'm really trying to reflect on my growth and development, I don't just see a list. What I see is all the kinds of things that I've been tagging around demonstrating my subject matter knowledge and using principles of learning. And then if I want to go and look at that in more detail, I can. But what I have is a greater sense of what I've been doing over a period of time. Once I've had a chance to look at that and reflect on that, what we're asking students to do as part of their professional portfolio is make selections. So now we're not saying, give me everything you've tagged as demonstrating your subject matter knowledge. Just choose the two best things, the things that you think did the most to provide evidence of your development in that space. And so what students did at that point was to, I guess I should have shown you, come down here, and one of the tags that they would then begin adding is this portfolio tag. And so once they've added the portfolio tag, when you go to the portfolio template, what we see is only those things, and it's not going to go there, only those things that, so now we've gone from 4 to 2, because those are the things that the student feels best represents who they are at that moment in time. That moment in time may only be a third of the way through their senior year. So they have an opportunity to come back and revisit this. And if you click on these, and so back up a step, all the instructor has to do if they want to look at this is go to the portfolio view. They don't have to go through the whole blog. They come here and they say, okay, I really want to be able to give feedback to my students on their development. So I can jump out in these little, what do you call them, light boxes? You can tell I'm not a techie. They pull up and you can actually see the evidence in those spaces. if you want to look more closely at it, and students write a meta-reflection. So those were some of the things that we developed. We also have this nifty little tool that actually wasn't so easy to do, I think, but is very helpful for the accreditation arm. Pack It Up. And when you click Pack It Up, what it does is take everything in the portfolio view, pack it up in a zip file that the student can then put into the assessment system or whatever. And so that provides a snapshot of a moment in time. Student continues their work uninterrupted, and it's really been an exciting way to start to think about how do I still support the learning without interfering with, this thing that we have to do is report to our accrediting agencies. Now, the reason I'm back this summer is that I want to be able to tell the story of how this went in the pilot. We learned some very interesting things that I've been writing about in the blog, but the commenting tool is critical for us. And so we're really trying to think about this collaborative reflection notion. What does that mean? Because still, in large part, the reflection that takes place in the portfolio is sort of within a silo. Right? And so how do we break down the barriers? Commenting tools are great, but how do we really track the flow of a set of ideas across a set of people and a set of blogs so that we really can get at the social negotiation of meaning, and that students can reflect on the social negotiation of meaning and not just their idea in their blog space. So that's what we're hoping to attend to this summer, and it won't be done by the end of the summer.
You need this back?
Thanks a lot for your introductions there. One of the things that we hope would happen over the summer is for the faculty fellows to actually sort of cross-pollinate. And I know that Chris and Stuart have had a chance to meet. I don't know if all four of you have ever had a chance to meet all at once. So this might be the golden opportunity that you have with your schedules to actually ask questions of each other. But Chris, one of the things that we talk about on your podcast are types of excellence, or I guess forms of excellence. Which way would it be? Excellences. And we talked about ideas like openness. Is openness in digital dialogue and digital media, social media, is a form of excellence. So I was wondering if the other panelists had an idea of what really makes like an excellent portfolio, or what's really good digital scholarship. What makes a really good instruction set? And I'm thinking of other popular sites like, I learned how to change the flat on my bike by watching YouTube. There's the Instructables site. So maybe Stuart, you could start off talking about those kind of. Is that what you have in mind? But you also talked about wikis, and I know that we use a knowledge base. We're actually using instruction sets all the time. I didn't even think about it how much until I heard about your project. So.
Yeah. I don't think we yet know what makes for, in some cases, what makes for an excellent portfolio or an excellent remix or an excellent instruction set. I think when we are working with a conventional genre that's well established, it has an offline counterpart, when we're working with institutional requirements for accreditation that we have to respond to, when we have a sort of pre-configured notion of the resume and how it works, then I think all of those standards, we already know a great deal about them. But I think when we begin to wander away from those things, I think it's very unclear. What makes for a good remix? We really don't know that. And in other words, everyone's very excited about remixing projects. But not every remix is very good. Some are terrible. Some are tremendous. How do we judge a remix project? And can we really bring that into the college curriculum until we have an answer for that question? We have to be accountable to the Faculty Senate. We have to be accountable to parents. More importantly, we have to be accountable to students. We're asking them to invest in something. What's our syllabus going to say about criteria for evaluation when it comes to a remix? And of course, a remix isn't one thing. Remixes look different for different contexts. So how do the criteria for evaluation vary from a 202C technical writing class to a philosophy class to a library research project? That answer, what is excellent communication or what is excellent fill in the blank, that question gets answered differently in different contexts. And that's a terrible answer to administrators and people who are very interested in standards, certain kinds of standards, because there's just too much flexibility in that kind of answer. So I think that then doesn't mean you can be unaccountable. That's the tension. You talked about some tensions. I see the tension there as being accountable for the curriculum while also not falling back into the kind of easy approaches and to things that are not sensitive to what's going on today. So, I mean, it's a terrible answer that I just gave you. What it basically means is that I'm ill-prepared to bring remix into the composition program in any kind of a significant way, because I can't defend evaluation very well. I mean, I can do it on an individual level. I can do it with one class, or I can think about it in my way. But when I have to scale it to 135 sections, when I have 100 teachers out there teaching these courses, when I have 30 brand new teachers, forget the remix. They don't even know how to teach the most basic traditional assignment that we have in the English department. So it's a very complex situation, and we shouldn't shy away from pursuing it and working on it. But I also think that we have to situate these questions in a very particular way. My solution has been to, because the English 15 course, the first year composition course, one of the objectives of that course is to prepare people for the rest of their academic career at Penn State, for the rest of their academic writing. And if you look very hard at the writing that students do in their courses at Penn State, they're doing very little of what all of you are doing here today. They're doing, I mean, there's some blogging, there's some Twittering, but none of it is formalized in assignments. People are still writing papers and essays of a very traditional form, and it's actually our responsibility to make sure that they continue to know how to do that. But it's also our responsibility to say, those aren't the only literacy activities that are out there. And if we're also preparing them for life beyond academia, for work life, and also for civic life, then we have a responsibility to start trying to get a better handle on these things, which is why we did the blogging pilot with our technical writing class, and we're incorporating things slowly. But I can't institutionalize it in any significant way until I can defend assessment practices. And I think we can do that, but I think we don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking just yet. The practice is there, but we haven't conceptualized the practice into some kind of grading heuristics or evaluation rubrics. We don't really know how to train teachers to think about it. You know, what constitutes a good use of Twitter and what doesn't? What constitutes a very productive blog post and what doesn't? We've made some headway there because a lot of people are blogging, but we're probably more out front there than we are in some other areas. And how does all of that then fit within a more traditional course with traditional grading expectations? It's pretty complex. That's my non-answer. I
have a non-answer to it. It's actually a question for Carla. Because what you said, Alan, you know, what is a good e-portfolio? I had a question in my mind that relates exactly to that. You mentioned that this summer you're working on building the commenting process in. And the thing that I found to be the biggest barrier with e-portfolio adoption, and I'm looking at it not so much from a student standpoint, but from a faculty standpoint. In the libraries, we've tried hard to encourage our new librarians who are going through the tenure process to build e-portfolios that they can use, actually whether they're in the tenure process or not, that they can use to show, just like you're showing with your student teachers up here, the major artifacts, the major things that they're creating, you know, and helping others learn about the library. And the big tension is with comments and with making it an organic social tool, and especially when it's something that enters into the promotion and tenure process. You know, how do you sort of ease people's, how do you not control the commenting process, but how do you structure that commenting process and also make it something that people are comfortable with, that they want to participate in, but that they also want to display?
I think that's the space we know the least about. But at the same time, we want to be able to allow room for comments, which can be hard intellectual work, right? To comment in a meaningful way. Your comment might propel someone's thinking forward or the thinking of the community forward. And our thinking is that that can be powerful evidence of your development as a professional. And so how do you capture and be able to think about your commenting, especially when your comments are now owned by someone else? So I go to your blog, I put a comment on your blog. My comment lives there. If you delete your post, my comment is gone. It's no longer part of my intellectual work that I can point to as evidence of my development. Now, the exciting thing this summer is that I'm being introduced to lots of tools that show us that your comments can continue to be your intellectual property, and how do we make best use of that. But structuring commenting is a tricky thing, and the thing that we tried in the pilot was to actually have sort of a blog buddy format in which people had to go to other, and so the interesting thing about this is you have to be dealing with a problem of practice that you care about, that other people care about. Otherwise, what's the point of commenting and trying to figure something out together? So this notion of a problem of practice was around teaching, right? So they were all in sort of the throes of getting ready to teach and teaching at about the same time. And so they actually had a reason to go and see, oh, how did that work when you did it with third graders or so on? So there was a relevance to the commenting that we built in. We required a certain minimum number of comments, but what we found is students commented well beyond that on each other's blogs. Now, when we asked them about this in the assessment of the project, of all the features of the blogs, I own it, it's my property, it's public, they loved all this stuff, rated very highly. Commenting, the ability to comment or receive comments, was the thing that stood out as not being as important to them, but yet they were doing it. So we're sort of perplexed by what does that mean? You're doing it, but you say it's not as important to you as these other things. So I don't know. I mean, that's what, if you have ideas, and that's, I think, part of what we're here to figure out is, I mean, we're in a room with a bunch of smart people who think about this stuff. How do we foster the kind of professional discourse that's evidence-based, that's driven around these spaces, that's focused on problems of practice? How do we really foster that in meaningful ways that, again, doesn't just move the individual forward, but moves the community forward in its thinking?
I just wanted to add, I guess, I'm coming at the question of assessment and the question of excellence and cultivating excellences in digital dialogue, maybe from the opposite perspective, because I know, Stuart, you're thinking about how to institutionalize, how to bring this to bear on a large scale. I'm thinking about I'm thinking about one of my main pedagogical purposes in my philosophy classes is how to cultivate the excellence of dialogue, whether it be through digital media or other media, physical conversations, in ways that push conversation forward. And Carla, as you had, I think you were using the vocabulary of negotiating meaning, right? The social negotiation of meaning. How do we cultivate that? What are the skills that, what are the excellences that students need to have? And that's where the question of openness comes from, the ability to have a certain kind of openness, have a certain kind of courage that comes with that exposure. That's one of the things I've been struggling with in this project, is in part because, you know, the normal mode is to go to the library and spend a lot of time reading and hoard your ideas for a long time and nourish them and bring them up as little, you know, saplings and embryos, and then throw them out there, and, you know, and so, you know, there's an exposure that comes with some of these social media mediums that really are a little bit daunting. So, you know, what I want to argue for is not to just throw everything out there and then just obliterate make everything completely open and completely public, but maybe press our comfort level a little bit in terms of the notion of openness and expose things so that they can be cultivated by us as a community. And what happens, and how do we drive that and allow that that dialogue that emerges there to really open up new possibilities of meaning for us. So, and I think that has to be done in an individual level. I mean, I think that's what I try to work on with my students in my classes. giving them, and I think the liberal arts is precisely designed to do this, giving the students the kinds of skills and cultivating the kinds of excellences that they need to be able to expose themselves in a little bit, to be able to respond in ways that are not reactionary, but actually trying to press issues of importance. So I think all of those things are important. I did that. I tried to use, and I guess I'll try and see if I can post this. Can I do this all so dynamically? I don't know. On the Twitter thing, to use a rubric last spring with a blog that I created, which I co-edited with my students. This was an honors class in philosophy, and had a lot of really positive. I had a very positive experience with this blog that we were co-editing. All the writing for the course was on the blog, except for the final paper, which they wrote as a traditional research paper. But there was no. There were not specific assignments throughout the semester, write me a blog post as if it were just a paper instead of handing it to me on a paper, post it to the blog. That's how I'd always done it before. This spring I just said, I wrote in the rubric, you have to post, you have to participate frequently and consistently on the blog, whether it be posts or comments. And they always wanted to know, well, how many is that? What's the number? And I'd never tell them the number because I didn't have a number in mind. And then 4 times during the semester, I gave a qualitative evaluation of how they were doing through Angel, all private. Nobody saw their evaluations. And I used the rubric, and the rubric really drove the assessment. I was able to really look, are they doing this? Are they participating frequently and consistently? Are their posts conceptually sophisticated? Are they engaged in substantive ways in the material? Do they do this on a regular basis, not just once when I say that the papers do? And what I was hoping happened, and I have some evidence that this was happening, what I was hoping was happening was that they would cultivate a kind of blogging mentality, which is to say that all the experiences that they were having they were asking themselves, is this something I could blog about? Is this something I could reflect upon? Is this something I could write about and say something interesting about? And that sort of, the whole I had a number of students say, I'm really glad I don't have to blog anymore because I don't have this worry on my mind. And I thought, okay, that's a victory. I got into their head. They're thinking about their world in a kind of reflective way, and they're wondering if the experience that they're having is something that's worth thinking about deliberating on.
Can I follow up on?
Certainly.
Yeah, I think one of the barriers to what you're talking about is a very old-fashioned notion of originality and authorship, and even plagiarism, that is sort of alive and well in academia and something that we have to work against all the time. If you're a technical writer at Microsoft and you're asked to write an instruction set for something, your first question is, has something already been written along these same lines? What resources are here? What can I cannibalize? What can I use? You search the web, you look for things, and that's in the culture. And your name is not on it, except maybe somewhere in a hidden panel with the names of many other people who maybe wrote documentation before you. It's the copyright, the ownership, the authorship is shared and identified more with the company. At the end of the day in a technical writing class, we ask students we ask them to do all of this, have this open community and culture, and to share work, and to comment, and do all of these things. But then we ask them at the end of the day in a very contradictory fashion, hand in your original work. What ideas are yours? Yours exclusively. Point to those. And that's what I'm going to grade you on. It's a very old-fashioned understanding of knowledge creation and of information work. And yet it's alive and well. And I think it's valid if you think about it in certain ways. I also think it's incredibly not valid if you think about it in other ways. And there's a big tension there that we struggle with all the time.
First off, I wanted to say I love the brain power at this table. I mean, I think it's really the value of the Faculty Fellows program that we have is that you guys are bringing real problems of practice and real deep philosophical and educational pedagogical problems, research problems, scholarship problems to our front plate, our front door, and just laying them there and saying, what are we going to do about these? Let's try to work together and find a solution. And that's when we come up with really interesting, evolutionary leaps, I think, with tools like the blogging platform. Cole, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about, intense debate and the ownership of the comments or anything like that, just briefly.
I have a lightning talk on it tomorrow.
Okay, well, stay tuned for that. If you weren't planning to come back, this is the cliffhanger, right? So you have to come back for that. The other thing I want to say is that several of you have mentioned preparing students for participation in kind of public life after college, participation in political discourse, participation in the workplace, contributions to things like wikis or other public sources of information. So I was wondering if you could address that a little bit further.
Well, in the writing program, we've been working to make a switch, and the discipline has been working to make a switch from really teacher-centered assignments to sort of student-centered assignments, and also literacies. Historically, in an English department, we try to teach some academic version of appropriate English, which clashes very interestingly and nicely with the kind of vernacular literacies that students bring to us. And increasingly, we're beginning to value more and more the vernacular. We're beginning to value the practices that students bring to our class as a valid form of literacy. And frankly, when it comes to the kind of Web 2.0 technologies and the things that people in this room are very interested in, we have a lot to learn from students about those practices, but there's never been room in the curriculum for that. So as opposed to always thinking in a top-down way about how English teachers know best about how to write, we're finally starting to open things up and say, let's look at what students are doing in their practices, and let's see if that can encourage us to think differently sometimes about how writing and reading now works. And that's a major shift, in large part because you have to relinquish in part the expert role. You as a teacher, you have to allow yourself to be uncomfortable with in effect, the domain knowledge of the class. I mean, how many teachers are comfortable walking into a class saying, I don't know everything there is to know about this subject? And there very well may be some people in this class who know a lot of things that I don't know. And together, we're going to explore this learning space. You won't find many faculty who are secure enough in their own skin to do that. I tell my students on the first day of class, I teach a web design class, it's always just out of my reach. That makes it fun for me. And that gives me a class, because I'm there to learn as well. And I tell them on the first day of class, I can probably answer 50% of your questions. And we're going to, if you ask me a question I can't answer, we'll figure it out together. Now, I can say that as someone who is white, male, and tenured. It's a very easy sort of position to take. But it's also a very good position to take. And we have to figure out how to let other teachers in the community with a less secure status feel like they can go into a classroom and take risks with these technologies, that they can run an activity not exactly knowing how it's going to come out, and that's perfectly okay. And I don't think we yet have that built into our institutional culture in the way that it needs to be. For me, I've just taken risks because I sort of can, because of my status. That's a very elitist way to think about things. There are lots of people who are really not in a position to take those risks, and yet they are doing some of the most difficult work of the university. They're really in the trenches, teaching large numbers of students, 7-8 sections a year, and they're in a very different situation. So I think that's something that we need to learn to contend with, and I think as soon as we can really encourage teachers to take more risks, worry less about how things may or may not go in a class, and have a reward system around that values risk-taking as much as it values sort of outcomes, so-called outcomes and performances, then I think we'll be a little further ahead in our understanding. Because we're really not practicing and conceptualizing this stuff as much as we should be, and I think it's in large part because of the larger institutional context. There are things that are discouraging. There's no one person saying you can't do these things. But institutions are funny in that way. They have these tendential forces. They have these tendencies that encourage people to, geez, if I'm teaching 8 courses, where's my incentive for increasing my workload by doing something different? We have to figure out how to encourage those people to, in fact, do something different.
I'm going to go off what Stuart just said about outcomes and making things manageable for instructors. The big project that our team is working on this summer is centered around digital literacy, which encompasses information literacy, but it also includes media literacy, technology literacy, basically every literacy, textual literacy, visual literacy, and sort of how can you create a project that will develop specific literacy outcomes in students so that they can be, as you're saying, Alan, responsible creators of information who create products that have a message that matters and that'll carry them through their lives well. And so what we're actually going to be doing this fall is we're going to be working with 2 different courses, a nutrition course and a library studies course. Emily Rimland and Ann Beeler are here. They're the instructors of that course. And we're going to be specifying specific learning outcomes for a video project in each of those classes and giving the students a pre-test and a post-test to see, did the video project assist them in working towards actually attaining some of those learning outcomes and maybe moving them closer to becoming information literate or technology not literate. Sorry. Information literate or technology literate. So it should be an interesting experiment in not only seeing where are these different literacies headed as far as how are they changing and especially how are they merging, because a lot of literacies used to be very much unto themselves, and really they're all blending together now, and which makes it easier to attain, I think, some a level of competency in a way, because you can have projects that cross over literacies, but at the same time it makes it more challenging for students and maybe more daunting for instructors too, who say, I just want to focus on one thing. So hopefully we're going to develop a good model that we can use with other instructors in the future who are working with the digital commons and with the libraries.
I wanted to touch on the question of, I think it was related to one of the questions that's up there on the, got 8 votes, about how do you create student buy-in, and it's related to what Stuart, I think, was talking about with regard to what we can learn from students. I mean, one of the things that I was struck by last spring with my the way that I used the blog as a kind of co-edited document, and the way I was conceptualizing that as a kind of co-authored document that we were all working on together, a dynamic one that ran over the course of the semester, was that that in a certain way I had to and maybe relinquishing control isn't really the right way to think about it, because it's controlling in a different way. I mean, you're not completely sort of opening the floodgates. There are certain things you've put in place as a faculty member to ensure that the kinds of contributions that you're getting are academically rigorous and that are of a certain kind of quality. And yet it is a different kind of control. It's a control that allows, I think, for the students to have a voice of their own and respects the voice of the students in a certain kind of way. And that's, from my perspective, how you get buy-in. When students see that, that post that I made on the blog at 2 a.m., 2 days ago, is now actually the centerpiece of this discussion we're having in class, because we've brought it up online and now we're talking about it, and I've now been asked in class to expound upon it in certain kinds of ways, and the comments that were made on it are now being valued in the classroom. There's a buy-in that happens that I was surprised to see. I was really moved to see the way in which students then felt an ability to turn the class to certain kinds of issues. And this is where it is an issue of relinquishing a certain kind of control, because I then had to go out and do a lot more work because it was a much more dynamic situation. I wasn't able to say, okay, it's Friday and now I've got this lecture, I'm going in to do this lecture. I've got to say, okay, what's been happening the last few days on the blog, and what are we talking about? How is this related to the reading that we're doing? How is this related to the wider social political culture that we have, that we're embedded in? So from my perspective, that's how student buy-in happens when they feel heard, and when what they say in this media is respected and brought and made a vital part of the experience. So I think that's one strategy that I think is really important. We're just going back.
I'm just going to connect to something that Chris was talking about, and to a comment that I made on Twitter earlier today during the Disruptive Technologies piece. You have to have the stance that student voice matters before any of this is going to happen. And I feel like I've been drinking the Kool-Aid too long. I hang out with people that are talking about this and pushing the envelope on this, and it's really great and exciting, but the reality, and Selden mentioned this, and it was clear in the talk the panel this morning, that that is not the norm even at Penn State. And while Penn State may be ahead in some spaces with this regard, overwhelmingly students are still, there was this thing about, are they passive, are they bored? They're conditioned. They're used to giving a right answer. It's not the answer they have, it's the answer we have, or that the book holds, or that the field holds. There's sort of this reconditioning them as these risk takers. So yes, one way to do that is for us to be explicit about our risk taking. So I'm going to try something new. I've never done this before. I'm out of my safety zone. But having that sort of discourse with the students, or I'm at a juncture now and I'm not really sure, or this is taking a lot longer than I thought. How do we make this more manageable? Engage the students in the problem solving. Now again, you've created that context in which there's a problem of practice related to teaching and learning that you're trying to solve together, and it doesn't all reside in one space or another. And I don't know how you solve the problem of doing that in large lecture courses, or if you're an untenured person who's not in a position of power. But at the end of the day, there's a part of going out and taking those risks and helping students understand why they're valuable things to do, even when they don't work out the way that you intended them to, or even when they fall short, which they've done plenty of times. And we have this big thing that we do in our program with our students where it's literally, if you screw up, you go woohoo, and you stand up and everybody claps for you, because it's evidence that you've stuck your neck out, you've taken a risk, and so what, you've screwed up, at least you learned something from that, and that's just as valuable. And so that becoming sort of the thread of conversation that's happening around whatever the content of the learning is supposed to be can be sort of an interesting side dialogue if you're in a position to be able to foster that kind of conversation in your class.
One of the things, just to add to that, is to ask yourselves, what are we modeling for our students? What kinds of pedagogical practices are we embodying as we go about doing our teaching? And so I like that idea of being explicit about your risk taking, and the blog allowed me to be just as involved online and making comments and directing in certain kinds of ways, but also just participating in the dialogue that was going on, that I think modeled what a good post, what I hope a good post would look like, what a good response would look like, that does move the conversation forward. One of in terms of the sort of blowback that I got, I was surprised in certain kinds of ways by it was really, this was an honors course, so I had a number of very type A personality students who had been conditioned, this goes to your condition, just, they're like, laser-seeking missiles, find out what that teacher wants and give that to them. And that's the kind of student I think I was. I was like, okay, I just figure it's a game, and just figure what's the syllabus say they want, and let's give it to them. And so when I would say, well, I don't have a number of posts that you make, I don't have exact assignments that you have to submit on this date at this time. I do have four times a semester qualitative evaluations, and you did see the participation on the blog go up as that date came closer. Okay, I understand that there's a dimension of coercion involved, but it was those type A students who were conditioned to seek out what the faculty wanted and to respond to that were having somewhat of frustration. They also ended up doing very well. They also, they adapt well. But what are we doing? What kind of students are we cultivating when our best students are the ones that just know how to obey the syllabus?
So I have a memory of when I taught middle school of always the kid with their hand up in the front row, like for every single question, who are probably the kids you're talking about. So did you find yourself sort of kind of pushing aside the blog post from those kids and going towards the ones that may not be thinking as much about your motives for the class, but just thinking more creatively?
Well, sometimes, that was the great thing about it. I was teaching in a technology classroom where I could pull up specific posts and highlight ones. And so what I noticed, and this is something, is going to be different with different people, some students needed to get their feel for the media by commenting only. They weren't real comfortable about posting, and then in the comments, in my evaluation, I had to sort of try and push them to that. But you could see over the course of the semester, some of them really coming into their own and finding their voice and beginning to move from commenting to posting. So I think you have to have some flexibility in your assessment of students in that regard. But yeah, you're going to have the same students that you have to talk too much in class, to talk too much online, and the nice thing is you can direct things to the people who are saying interesting things, who are not participating in that way, and also there are those people who don't feel comfortable talking in class at all, but like to be able to work out their ideas online and think about them and then post them once they got it all worked out. So that was an important part of that. I think there's a lot of ways in which we're talking about how these technologies revolutionize things, but there's also a lot of dynamics that are the same as they've always been in all teaching. This is just another mode of communication, and dynamic in interesting ways, disruptive in interesting ways too.
But it's another mode on top of a whole bunch of other modes, right? This is all much more additive than substitutive. So 30 years ago, if you're teaching in a college classroom and you're thinking about the kind of writing that's associated with your course, an English course, a philosophy course, a science education course, a library course, it's pretty much the print essay, right? And we still have the print essay and all its complexities. Lots of people can't write a print essay today. Lots of people can't write like a sentence today. I'm talking about faculty, not students. But none of that has gone away, right? And so add to that the responsibilities of teaching, like writing effective email messages, right? Composing in multimedia, productive blogging, the role of twittering, right? Cell phone use, right? So I now see the role of the composition program as helping students understand when it's most productive to reach for one literacy technology rather than another. So we're not all about the essay anymore. When does it make sense to use the essay form and all its tradition? And that's you can probably answer that fairly easily, although we could complicate it. When does it make sense to work by cell phone? When does it make sense to Twitter versus blog? What about sticky notes? How do they fit in? I see them as the most flexible literacy technology we kind of have, because they can attach themselves in very dynamic ways to sort of any print artifact. When you look at the landscape of literacy technologies and all the possibilities and configurations and hybrids, students don't even know when to turn to what and for what purposes. And you look at the whole range of online services and Web 2.0 technologies, people don't even know how to sort out these things, and again, for what purposes and for what audiences. And in many ways, I see that as the role of higher education, more specifically of a composition class, is to help people learn how to kind of surf the field of possibilities, make productive decisions, understanding that there's probably more than one answer to the question, but then they should be able to defend whatever answer that they come up with in an intelligent way, And then in an ongoing way, continue to learn about these technologies. In that way, I think it's much more evolutionary. Even if we see some practices that we maybe haven't really seen before, they still get embedded in something of a traditional context. I mean, if academia is anything, it is a traditional context. And it serves to both encourage and constrain our uses of these literacy technologies. They're not neutral in any kind of way. They're not neutral in their design. They're not neutral in their use. And that's not a criticism. They're human artifacts. They're cultural artifacts. So how do we get students to understand that these are not sort of pure, neutral modes for communication, but rather they're communication modes invested by designers and users with meaning? How do we first situate them in that kind of tricky, interesting, and very real way, and then get them to sort through like what they can do with those invested, biased political technologies. By political, I simply mean that they're designed to do certain things and not other things, right? Like they have a tendency to them. And so how do people choose among those tendencies and possibilities? That's not currently a part of the curriculum. It's not currently a part of any kind of standards. And yet students they wait for their teachers to tell them what they're going to do. You know, they wait for their teacher to say, give me a print essay. But that's not how the world's going to work after the class.
So how is it part of the scholarship of the academy? So where do you go, where do we go to collectively understand that so that we can pass it on to our students?
I think we're inventing it sort of currently, right? I mean, I don't think you'll exactly find it as conventional thinking. We still, take my course. I mean, I'm very guilty of this. Students, there are 6 assignments, and probably 4 of the 6 assignments are traditional essays. That's just kind of how it looks. And again, I would change that relatively quickly if I had the infrastructural support, which Cole is beginning to provide, but also if we had on the research side and the pedagogy side, we had a much better understanding of how to assess these kinds of assignments and pitch them in a kind of a broader way to the university community that has some oversight, right? You want to get something to the faculty senate. I don't know if you've ever tried to do that. It's like an exercise in brutality. I mean, it is unbelievable. That's why nobody ever takes a course off the books, even if it's never been taught, because getting it on was extremely painful. We have like 50 courses in English that have never been taken off the books. They haven't been taught for 20 years. Try to get something new through with some unusual thinking, and you're going to get a whole bunch of old-fashioned questions. And we still have to ask hard questions about assessment. We still have to ask very hard questions about what are the objectives of this course? What are students learning? What do we want them to be able to do when they're finished? How does it fit in? Those are all fair questions. But there are answers, the different answers to those questions that we're trying to generate here will not ring very true to many folks. And we have to begin to make the case for why a different kind of assignment with a different kind of rubric, grading rubric, might make some sense.
Can I just address that for a sec? Because, I mean, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a real problem that I was having with plagiarism. And for some reason, one semester, students were I had like 4 or 5 papers plagiarized, and it was because I had at the end of my modern philosophy class, I had a paper on Descartes that I was assigning, and they're not but 1,000 courses out there in the world that have a modern philosophy course assigned a paper on Descartes. And at that point, I decided, okay, I can't really. What I need to start doing is teaching the process of research rather than the product, and rather than just saying, okay, give me a research paper at the end. And I think one of the things that these technologies allow us to do is, and I think you were talking about this, Carla, and I think the portfolio allows you to do this, which is to make the process part of the product that you're assessing. And so you know, it's not just that you've written a beautifully constructed paper. That's terrific. But how did you get to that? Can I look back on your portfolio or wherever and see the process that you came through to get this? Can I see how you responded to critical comments that you were getting? Did you take those as opportunities to learn something new, or did you close them off as just ridiculous things that you don't want to deal with? Right? These are, I mean, okay, that's all part of writing a good research paper, but that's also part of being a good manager in an institutional setting, at a job that you might ultimately get. I mean, my students, even if they major in philosophy, a lot of them won't go into academic philosophy. They might go become part of a non-government organization, or they might go into other kinds of work. And so what are the skills that we're giving them? And not just skills, but I mean, skills is too... skills still seem to me to be too oriented toward product. What are the excellences we're cultivating in them, right? The character that they're getting by virtue of going through this process where they're exposed to criticism in the way that we're trying to expose them to it in a relatively comfortable environment where we can jump in there and say, okay, that was not very helpfully put when you said this comment was stupid. You know, that's not how we respond to each other, but we have more constructive ways of doing it, and we have more constructive ways of responding to one another. So I think a lot of that goes to how to make our students successful participants in the world in which they live. So, and I think that goes across all kinds of disciplines.
And the piece for me about the tools that helps that happen is the openness, right? So when it's public scholarship, and you can point to something and say, that's not a view that I hold, or I disagree with that idea, but here's why. So here's what happens in the space between, right? What the curriculum is, what the hidden curriculum is, whatever. You have to get it out there. And it may be because I work with people who are going to be elementary teachers. They want everybody to hold hands and get along. They don't want to disagree. They want to come to consensus on everything. And so a big hurdle is, how do you help people see that it's actually through the process of articulating and then saying, I thought I agreed with you, but then you said this, and then I'm not really sure what you mean by this. Tell me more about this. And this kind of conversation that emerges around where we don't fit neatly together, that's very difficult for students to participate in, that's where the meaning making happens. And so the fact that that can be partially captured. I mean, Chris said something in sort of his opening statement about the writing versus remembering and the strength of that, right? And so now we have not just writing, but artifacts. So it's not that I'm posting my paper, it's that I wrote a paper and now I'm thinking about, how'd that paper help me grow as a professional? And part of that may be that you responded to my paper and or my thinking, and you asked me a question that I hadn't thought about, and now it's moved me into a different space. So again, the openness is part of the power, and if we can harness that as a way to see that making our thinking explicit, being able to justify, being able to use evidence, and being able to disagree professionally actually helps us move forward as a community in our thinking. And I keep coming back to the moving forward as a community, because I think ultimately whatever profession or professional space we're working in, that's what we want. That's one of the excellences, to use your terminology, that we want to be able to foster, is how do our contributions move the community forward? It's not just I'm making a contribution just to make a contribution, which I have to say this sort of feels like up here, because like it's really weird to look out there and everybody looking at it.
They're talking.
I think places that institutionalize openness and institutionalize shared student learning outcomes are the places that are most successful in all the things that we're talking about. I don't know if that's happened really locally here yet.
Well, and I think plagiarism is a great... It sort of brings all of this into relief, really. In liberal arts, we're in sort of ground zero for plagiarism, right? The first year composition course. And plagiarism is, there are two categories. If I have a paper in front of me, there are two categories that it can go into for plagiarism. One is plagiarism, which is a student taking somebody else's work, putting their name on it, and handing it in. basically stealing, right? Get your roommate's paper, put your name on it, hand it in for credit. That's wrong. Everybody agrees that that's wrong, and that's kind of plagiarism that we don't want to tolerate. I rarely see that. I see that, out of the 10,000 students a year, we see a handful of cases of that kind of plagiarism. They're pretty clear. We can typically prove them with a few web searches, and that's that. But the other thing that we see all the time is what my college loves to call academic incompetence. That's the phrase, I kid you not. And what that means is that a student has in fact plagiarized, according to the college, but they didn't really intend to do it. And what that really means is that they haven't worked with their sources in a very good way. And so they've handed in something that kind of mixes up sources, but there was no intention to sort of get away with anything. Now, the college will see past that if the student, again, with this outdated notion of originality, college wants the student to be able to sort out what's original, theirs, from the sources they use, somebody else's work. But there are whole disciplines that are based on plagiarism. Web design, architecture. They don't call it plagiarism, they call it modeling. And we don't even, you're going to design a web page, what do? You start looking at web pages. You're going to put up a building, what do? You start looking at buildings that are like the one that, you want to do. It's a very generative form of invention that somehow is not allowed in many college classrooms, sort of across the disciplines. And we're still not very good at helping people understand that kind of collective intelligence is, leveraging that kind of collective intelligence is exactly what you want to do, not a no-no. And it's still very much a no-no, on the college campus. And I think until we kind of work through that, we're going to be dealing with a lot of foolishness. These outdated notions of originality, of plagiarism. We plagiarize in the composition office. I have 30 new teachers coming in this fall to teach. They're all new to the English graduate program. None of them have taught before. What are we going to do? We're going to give them a syllabus, and we're going to tell them to put their name on it. There's a plagiarism statement on that syllabus, which I wrote. They're plagiarizing my plagiarism statement, right? That's a kind of ethical plagiarism that we engage in for the purposes of educating our community. And there's really no other good way to do it, and it makes perfect sense. But we can't seem to sort of tolerate ethical plagiarism among student learners. Yet we tolerate it all the time in kind of our teaching ranks and in our administrative documents. When an administrator has to write something at Penn State, they go right to the boilerplate. And they don't think twice about it. In no way in a million years could a student go to some kind of a model. We would never encourage that. And we'd ask them for not a 50% revision of an existing thing for a new context, which would be a good remix, but rather, you're working in a vacuum. You can't look at all of that stuff. Give me your original essay. And, it's like a 1950s or 60s view of academia.
Oh, well, we are just about out of time here. So was there a single burning question that anybody wants to ask, or maybe the panel wants to ask each other before we go on a break? No? Honestly, it's been an honor to sit up here with you guys. I think the conversation has been excellent, and I look forward to working with you for the rest of the summer. So thank you. Thank you very much. We now have a break until about 3 o'clock, and then at that point, Brett, where are you at? Oh, there you are. Brett's going to start the next session on educational gaming. Thank you.